I was born and raised in Fort Collins, Colorado. It was mid-January, 2016. I was 23 years old and had recently started dabbling in the dating scene again. I met a guy on eHarmony and we decided to meet for breakfast at a little restaurant. The date went really well, and after about an hour and a half, my date, whom I'll call Josh, asked if I wanted to go for a walk with him and his dog, Bandit. I told him I'd love to, so we left the restaurant and I followed him in my car to an open space area called Legacy Park in North Fort Collins that ran along the Poudre River. I texted my mom to be safe and told her where we were going. Snow covered the footpath that we walked along. Josh and I talked about our favorite places to hike in Colorado, and we both mentioned wanting to do a 14er that summer. Bandit was off-leash, running and playing in the snow. Josh mentioned he wasn't totally comfortable having Bandit off-leash because of some frozen-over sections along the river. All of a sudden, we heard a little splash in the river. We thought it was maybe a bird or falling snow from a tree, but before we could do anything, Bandit immediately ran towards the river and jumped in, chasing the sound. We immediately ran to the bank and noticed that the area Bandit was in was not frozen over, but the edges around the bank were. Bandit was trying to pull himself out of the water, but couldn't. The ice along the edge was too slippery. In that moment, both of us panicked. Josh started screaming Bandit's name and we both ran downstream, trying to get ahead of him. Only 100 or so feet away was a big frozen-over area of river. Josh and I started screaming in panic as we both jumped down the side of the embankment. But we didn't get there in time. Bandit was already under the ice. With our adrenaline rushing, both of us jumped on top of the ice, screaming and searching the water below for his dog. All of a sudden, I heard a loud crack. The sound of the ice cracking echoed throughout the woods. I looked at Josh in fear, and then we both fell through the ice into the frozen water. The water was waist-deep only, but the temperature took my breath away. Both Josh and I struggled to get back on the ice, but we were able to pull ourselves up. Within about 60 seconds, Bandit came back up to the surface of the water on the other side of the ice block. Josh grabbed him by his collar and pulled him onto the ice, and we both dragged him back to the embankment. Josh was screaming for help, and by that time, a few joggers had stopped to help us and had actually called 911. Bandit wasn't breathing, so I immediately started CPR on him while screaming for someone to get help. As I was doing CPP, I could hear the sloshing of water in Bandit's lungs, and I knew it was bad. Josh was completely inconsolable. At one point, he screamed at me that we should get him to a vet and I should get my car. With that, I jumped up and started running back to the parking lot about a half-mile away. I was soaking wet, freezing, and didn't even realize right away that I had lost my shoes in the river. I got to my car and floored it through the woods to get to Josh and Bandit. When I found them, Josh had Bandit in his arms and was running towards me. He jumped in my car and I raced to an emergency vet clinic about a mile away. When we got to the clinic, we threw open the doors, screaming for help. Several veterinary staff ran out from the back and took Bandit from Josh's arms. We both fell to the floor, sobbing. One of the vet's techs stayed with us as the staff vigorously worked on Bandit. At this point, I had no idea what to do. I had just met this guy. I didn't know if he wanted me to hug him and hold him or leave him alone. After about 15 minutes, the vet came out crying and told us that they did everything they could, but Bandit did not make it. The screaming and crying that came after was something from a horror movie. Josh called his family, who were from Arizona. As he spoke to them, the vet staff asked me if I needed anything. I told them that this was actually a first date and I had no idea what to do. One of the staff noticed an open and bleeding wound on my foot and bandaged it up for me. I didn't know it at the time, but I also had 2 broken toes and had ripped off my big toenail. I know this isn't necessarily a scary story, but it was the worst first date and worst day in general I have ever had. My heart is still broken, over 5 years later, as I write this story. Love your animals, and hold them close. I had been out of the dating game for roughly a year, and knowing that I am an awkward mess, my best friend had convinced me to try out OkCupid. I started using the site, thinking that I can get to know people online and then try a date. But now I know, it was a terrible idea and I'm still mad at her. So, I met this guy on the site, and we spent a few weeks chatting and getting to know each other. He seemed really cool. He asked me on a date, and I said sure. Here's the part where I'm a moron and am surprised I didn't get murdered. I said I prefer low-key dates, so he suggested that he'd cook us dinner and we'd watch indie horror films at his place. I was so stupid to agree with that. I showed up to his place. I had previously developed a code word system through text with my bestie, and she had all the details of where I was. He met me outside, and I realized I towered over him. At 5 feet 7 inches, that rarely happens to me, but I shrugged it off. Can't help your height, right? We sat on the couch, and he put on this weird Italian art film. No subtitles, in all Italian, neither of us know what was happening. So, I just sat there, feet flat on the ground, spine rod straight, sipping my wine, when he decided to basically curl up in my lap. Then he started nuzzling my face. Like that things cats do. But with his face on my face, for at least 10 straight minutes. His dog looked at me with pity. At that point, I excused myself to the bathroom and texted the bestie to call me and get me out of there. After taking her call 20 minutes later, I politely tried and thanked him for the glass of wine and made my way off the couch. But he laid across me and forced cuddles me. Wouldn't let me leave, so I just stood up and he plummeted to the floor. Because, like I said, I was an Amazonian compared to him. He popped up off the floor to help me put my coat on, and gave me one good sniff, right at the nape of my neck. Pretty sure some of my hair still infused to his brain from how deep an inhale that was. I made no attempt to hide my running down the 3 flights of stairs and up the block to my car. Deleted my account that night. Oh God, never again. I had been talking to this guy online for a couple of days, and we decided to meet for lunch. He worked in the mall next town, and asked if I would meet him there after his shift was over, and we could go from there. I said cool, no problem. I got there at the agreed upon time. I texted him and he said he was running behind at work, but if I wanted to come and hang out in the store he shouldn't be more than 15 to 20 minutes. Again, I understood. I've also worked in retail. So, it turned out he worked at GameStop. I hung out in there looking at the games and stuff. I'm really not into video games at all, so I was not very interested, but I still wanted to give the guy a chance. I ended up waiting for about 45 minutes. I was actually in the middle of telling him that we should reschedule since he couldn't leave work. Then he miraculously figured out a way to leave. He said he's sick of all the restaurants in the mall and wanted to go to the Applebee's down the road. So, we got in his car, and as we were driving, I was trying to figure out something to talk about. I asked him if he's into sports, because I went to some college and I enjoyed the football games. He went on this rant about how football is stupid and anyone who enjoys it is also stupid. There was awkward silence throughout the rest of the ride. The meal part of the date was unremarkable. It wasn't bad, but I don't really remember what we talked about. I remember, I told my friend to call me so I could have an excuse to leave if I wanted one. But I ignored her call, so I guess it wasn't awful. On the way back to the mall where my car was, there was kind of a lot of traffic, so it took a while. I had my hands in my lap. He kept reaching over and was trying to hold my hand, and I politely pulled away. But he just kept getting more and more aggressive with it until I literally could not pull my hand away from him. As soon as the car stopped in the parking lot, I hopped out and said, "Well, thanks, bye," and started to book it toward my car. Halfway across the parking lot, I got grabbed from behind and I was in a backwards bear hug. The incident freaked the fuck out of me. Then I noticed it was none other than my date. He said he had a great time and wanted to see me again. I said, maybe. He went in for a kiss and I denied that shit. I got in the car and left right away. He called me when I was less than 2 minutes away and asked if I wanted to be his girlfriend. I said, sorry, but I don't think this is going to work out. In his defense, he never contacted me again, which really surprised me. Now that I know what an incel is, I can say that this guy was probably one. I was in a couple of classes with this guy named Eric. He and I were both English majors, so I had known him for 3 years, but not so well. Senior year of college, he decided to ask me out for a drink, and I said yes. He suggested going to the local college bar, and I agreed that it would be nice. When we arrived, several people started calling my name, including a few male friends of mine. I told them I was there to have a drink with Eric, and that we would join them, if Eric was interested. Eric said that would be fun, so we joined their table. Eric and my friends got along fairly well, but Eric started to get drunk. Since the bar was within walking distance from my house and Eric had driven to my place, I was worried that he might want to stay over. I did not want him to, and as the evening progressed, I had decided that I wasn't very interested in him. I pointed out to Eric that he needed to go home that evening and that he had to drive. I specifically told him that he could not stay at my place. Since I had made my wishes known to him, and he's ultimately responsible for himself, I didn't say anything when he proceeded to become extremely drunk. Around 12:30 a.m., it was clear that he needed some help. I had abandoned our date by that time as he had decided to drink himself into a stupor. A male friend of mine offered to help me get him back to my place. On the walk home, Eric was crying drunk that he was jealous of the other guys, and he just wanted me all for himself. Yeah. You are right. It was creepy. Clearly, Eric could not drive home. My friend wrangled him to the living room couch before leaving. I threw a blanket at him and was really pissed because this person was very drunk and was in my house then. Luckily, I locked the door to my bedroom before climbing into bed. Very shortly after, I heard a light tapping, and then a voice, "Can I come in?" I hollered at him to go back to bed. Well, this went on for most of the night. He was even turning the door handle as if he would have come in regardless of my answer. He tried it several times. When I woke up, I stormed into the living room, ripped the blanket off of him, and told him to sleep it off outside, in his car. Yes, class was quite awkward from then on. To preface, this was a date in high school. I don't think my date, Matthew, had ever been on a date before because he was so strange the whole time, but also strangely confident, like he didn't think his behavior was strange at all, which made it even stranger. First off, my dad had to drop me off at his house because I didn't have my own car yet and Matthew was driving to his house from out of town with a bunch of friends he had been hanging out with. He was 30 minutes late, which made my dad absolutely pissed because he had stuff to do. When he finally showed up, he invited me inside to meet his whole family, and I had to listen to his mom share some stories about Matthew as a little boy. After that conversation subsided, I asked where we were going to go eat because I assumed since it was basically dinner time, we were going to make it a traditional dinner date. Matthew looked perplexed and said, "Oh, I already ate with my friends, but we can still go somewhere. I'll just order a drink." We hopped in his mom's van and headed to a Thai restaurant. I ordered my meal and he ordered his drink. We ate and talked, and this part of the date wasn't bad. But as things were wrapping up, he looked with concern at my plate because there was a garnish left uneaten on it. He asked, "Oh, are you going to eat that?" I furrowed my brows for a moment, but I said, "No." "Do you want it?" And he promptly grabbed it off my plate and said, "I just hate wasting food." Then the waitress came around with the check. I'm somewhat traditional and prefer the guy to pay on the first date, or at least offer to pay, but since I ordered a meal and he just ordered a drink, we both just decided to pay separately. The only problem was that he only had a debit card and his drink was under the minimum limit for paying with a card, and he didn't have cash. So, I paid for everything. He didn't even offer to pay or bat an eye. On our walk back to the van, he was suddenly overcome with an urge to use the bathroom and barely gave me a warning. That was something like, "I gotta go," and he ducked into a random restaurant to use their bathroom, leaving me on the sidewalk outside by myself. He took a pretty long time. When he finally got out and we hopped in the van, he asked if I'd want to watch a movie with him. I said sure, and we headed back to his place. He escorted me into their movie room, and it was literally an otherwise empty room with a TV set in the corner, no furniture, no decorations. I was perplexed, because he lived in the rich side of our town and his family seemed fairly wealthy otherwise. I awkwardly sat down on the floor, against the wall opposite the TV, and waited for him to pop the DVD in. But, after pausing at the door, he asked, "Hey, do you want to just sit and talk a bit before the movie?" I didn't really feel like I had a choice, so I said sure. He slid up next to me on the floor, and with very little build-up, he proceeded to unload all of his childhood traumas. He did 90% of the talking, and as our conversation progressed, he continued to inch closer and closer, into my side, and eventually had his hand on my upper thigh, which made me uncomfortable. After about 30 long minutes of this, I cleared my throat, and suggested we start the movie since I had to be back home by 10 and it was already 8. He reluctantly got up and popped the DVD in, which was a relief to me. Halfway through the movie, he began slowly inching his hand closer and closer to mine, until he finally wove his fingers through mine. I was not comfortable with this, but I didn't have the confidence to reject it and honestly felt kind of trapped. About 10 minutes after that, he launched himself on top of me and tried to kiss me. I immediately turned my face away and told him he needed to take me home. That was my last straw. The whole ride home was so tense and awkward. We never went on another date again, and after a few texts, things went something like, "I think we should just be friends," and we stopped talking to each other altogether.
A few years ago, I was using Tinder to meet friends and to find a partner, which now I realize was a really bad idea. I would swipe right on everyone, hoping to find someone to talk to, and to make a friend, as I was homeschooled and kind of a loner with no friends. I remember meeting a funny girl, who I will name Katie for this story. Katie started the conversation with memes, funny jokes, and pickup lines. Me being someone who needed anyone to talk to was filled with excitement. We talked for a few hours and Katie ended up wanting my Snapchat username. I agreed and sent it to her, hoping she wasn't fake or a man using a fake picture catfishing other. Katie added me and sent a picture of her face. To my excitement, Katie was real and just as beautiful as her profile pictures. After a week of talking, Katie started asking personal questions, and that seemed kind of strange to me. Questions like, where I lived, what my address was, why I lived with my family, and so on. I never sent her my address, but, in my head, red flags started raising as she would often guess what I was wearing. One day, she told me that she liked my Blink-182 shirt before I had even snapped her a picture. Not knowing about the Snap Map update at that time, I was surprised and frightened at the same time. A few days later, Katie posted a Snapchat story. Before I go further, I want to mention, Katie lived in a town 45 miles north of me. Anyway, that day, Katie posted a picture of a playground to her story. I was not that focused while browsing the stories and didn't realize what I saw. An hour later, she sent me a snap of her at a park, along with the caption, "I see your house from here." To my disbelief, I realized she was at the park that was about a 3-minute walk from my house. Panicking, I responded asking where she was. She responded with the name of my city. I asked her what she was doing there and she stated that she wanted to surprise me and see me. I asked her how she knew where I lived, and she replied that she had her connections. That day, I was really frightened rather being surprised. To be honest, I wasn't looking for a relationship with Katie. She was a nice girl, but not someone I'd be in a relationship with, especially since Katie had an 18-month-old daughter. I told Katie, I was a little creeped out by the fact that she knew where I lived, without me ever telling her. That made her really upset. Katie started arguing with me and telling me how I didn't appreciate her taking the time to surprise me. Keep in mind, we didn't plan a date and I wasn't interested in a relationship with her. I remember Katie saying something really rude to the point where I blocked her. A few hours later, I had to go to McDonald's with my father to get dinner for my family. As we were ordering, I felt my stomach drop and a cold breeze overcoming my body. I felt something off. As I turned around, I saw Katie standing behind me looking insanely upset. I quickly turned back around and pretended I didn't see her. I heard my name coming from her mouth and my father looked confused. I turned around, walked up to her and she chewed me out again, asking why I blocked her. At that point, giving her the benefit of doubt, I unblocked her and gave her a hug, stating I was busy with my family today. As soon as I got home, she snapped me saying she would see me soon later this week. I had to block her again because this creeped me out. A week went by and nothing was heard from Katie. That was until the day I was cleaning up and went to take the trash outside. As I opened my door, I was stunned seeing Katie inside a car in front of my house. Freaked out, I dropped the trash bag and slammed my door. To this day, I don't know what she intended to do or what she wanted from me, but my advice to anyone listening to this is, always check to see if your Snap Map location is on or not. Those gut feelings of something being wrong, being watched, or some unseen danger always freak me out. But I did have a strong sense to get the hell out, one day, while sitting by a little river deciding on fishing or not. I had just got my pack off and found a spot to sit when I had that odd feeling of being watched from behind. I got up and moved downstream about 400 yards to a spot where there was a larger clearing between the river and the taller bushes and trees. I didn't see or hear anything while walking, only some old deer tracks in some dried mud, but when I got to looking at a spot to sit for a while, I got that feeling again. I could see pretty good all around me about 100 to 175 yards. So I thought that I was being silly. I ate some of my food that I brought, and watched the area around me as I tried to figure out which lure to use. For a while, the feeling went away. I fished for about an hour with no luck. At one point, I needed to urinate. So, I stood up and walked back into the bush to take care of the business. While standing there, that feeling came back stronger than before. All I could hear was the urine hitting the ground. No birds, no wind, no little critters of any kind. I finished and walked back to my spot. As I got there, I bent down to pick up my pole, and I heard my dad's voice, calling my name out loud and clear, using a tone of voice that meant, "Do it now and ask no questions." Well, my dad had passed away 3 years ago. Like others have said, instantly, every cell of my body was all keyed up. The area I was in is known to have bears, mountain lions, and wolves were just starting to make a comeback. But I hadn't seen any sign or heard from anyone else. I grabbed my stuff and packed my bag as quick as I could. This time, I took my revolver out of my pack that I brought as extra weight and for snakes and put it on my hip. Normally, I don't like to carry my gun like this. As I put my pack on, that feeling of danger got even stronger. I started to walk back to my truck the way I came in, and froze solid after a few steps. I could not go back the way I came in. I stood there, listened and watched for about 10 minutes and heard nothing. The river was running slow, so it hardly made a sound. I looked all around me, and every time I looked back up the trail I came in on, I got more and more nervous. The trail looped around back to my truck, but it was about a 2-mile walk versus a 3 to 4 mile walk. I went the long way back, and when I got to my truck, something had been there and scratched it up pretty good on the driver's side and tailgate. I don't have a clue what it could have been, because I was in a designated parking spot that had just been graveled. There were scuff marks, but I could not find anything that looked like a print from a man or animal. That feeling of danger did not go away until I had driven up to the top of the ridge, and was just about back onto pavement. When I got to the T-junction in the road, I saw a game warden and a sheriff deputy parked and talking to each other. They were kinda blocking the road. I pulled up and they got out and walked over to my truck to talk to me. The conversation started normally. I told them I was fishing down at the river with no luck. So, I decided to come back. When I mentioned my truck had gotten all scratched up while parked, they got quiet, lost their smiles, and looked at each other. They asked what time I parked and which way I went up or down the river, and if I noticed anything around the parking lot. I said, I saw some scuff in the gravel, but nothing else. I did not say anything about the weird feelings. Again, they looked at each other and said, "Okay, have a nice day," and went and moved their trucks off the road. This all happened between about 10 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. in late May of 2005. I never went back as I moved to another town at the end of June. I would have just thought I was being paranoid being out there by myself. But, the way those two cops acted, made everything else feel even stranger. Someday, I would like to go back there. But I'll surely take a buddy along. And maybe my shotgun. My wife is from a Native American family. From time to time, they carry out a traditional ceremony named sweats. This is basically a form of prayer and cleansing. During the sweat, you go inside a teepee-shaped tent, usually a frame of wood covered by leather or tarps. In the center of the tent, they dig a hole in the ground. They heat up big rocks in a fire until they are red hot, and then put the rocks in the hole. Everyone participating in the sweat sits inside encircling the rocks. Then they close up the tent and begin to throw water on the rocks. Steam forms in the tent and it gets very hot, a lot hotter than a sauna. I was in New Mexico in my father-in-law's house. The second sweat I attended was really the first one I got proper instruction on the do's and don'ts. I won't go into details, but something my wife told me was, not to lean back or try to avoid the heat. From what I gathered, it was disrespectful to do so. So, we get in the seat lodge, and they throw in 6 to 7 rocks inside the hole. The last rock they throw in kinda bounces out off the hole and partially lands outside of the hole right in front of me. I could already feel the heat from the rock near my leg. The sweat begins, and as they pour water, I can feel that extreme heat going up my body. I remembered what my wife had told me, but I felt like I was going to faint. Well, it wasn't uncommon for that to happen in there. So, I moved my back as far as I could, leaning it on the tent wall. I looked up trying to avoid the heat as much as possible. About a minute or so, after I did this, I feel a push on my back as if someone was standing outside pushing on my back. It wasn't that hard, and at first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. So, I stayed there and a few seconds later, I felt another push, this time a little rougher. I was so startled that I almost jumped in the hole with the rocks. This was in my father-in-law's house in New Mexico, and he owns a big property. There is no way there was anyone outside doing that to me. We were there alone. I later told my wife what had happened and she said it was most likely spirits telling me to do it right. The whole thing still startles me, but not really in a bad way. One night, I was camping with my wife on the Wakiwa River in Florida. It was a great day. We canoed in, and pitched hammocks in some sweet gum trees on a small island in the center of the river. Then we built a fire, had dinner, laid in the hammocks, and watched the sun go down. Couldn't ask for a better night. At some point, we drifted off to sleep. I was sound asleep when I bolted upright in my hammock. It was absolutely silent, and the kind of dark that would make a coal miner uneasy. I have spent a lot of time in the woods and don't scare really easy. I grabbed my flashlight and shined around the little island. Everything was okay. Then I shined it down to the ground. The island was absolutely crawling with carpenter ants. There were literally millions of them. They didn't really scare me, as they are not particularly aggressive, but that many of them is unsettling to say the least. It was about this time that my wife woke up. I didn't know you could stand up in a hammock. And the scream she let out probably hurt some blue whale's ears in the Pacific somewhere. I kept telling her to calm down, they weren't going to bother us, well at least, that was what I hoped. But that was it. The camping trip was over. She wanted out, and I mean right then, without any delay. So, I reached around and got a palm frond and lit it with a Zippo and used it like a flaming broom to sweep the ants out of my way. I started packing up, keeping everything in the hammocks to keep the ants off. When I had it all packed, I went over and flipped the canoe upright. It was black on the inside. They had taken over our ride out. More screaming, mainly along the lines, "Why did I let you take me into this?" So, I took another flaming broom and swept out the ants. Then, I got it in the water and piggybacked my wife to the canoe. That was real interesting getting her in and not turning it over. After that, I loaded the boat, took down the hammocks, and we headed up the river to where we put in. Florida rivers are interesting at night, lots of gators and other shiny-eyed critters out and about. My wife would not help me paddle. She gripped my flashlight like a lightsaber and swung it from side to side, as if she was fending off Darth Vader. Needless to say, the trip upriver was interesting to say the least. We finally got the launch and loaded up and went home. To this day, she still will not go anywhere near a canoe. A kayak, yes, but not a canoe. Back in the day, when I was in college, me and the oldest took off to a lake in the wilds of Glacier Country. I have extensive backcountry exposure, even did a stint, as a big game guide, in a remote backcountry camp. On that day, we enjoyed the fishing and settled in for the night. I pulled out my pan and stoked up a nice fire. It was clear and cool as the sun faded into the western slopes. We cooked up some fresh rainbows with garlic and butter, and filled our stomachs. I leaned back against the cooler after pulling out a refreshing beverage. The boy was soon asleep by the fire, as it had been a busy day. I sipped my beer and watched the moonlight, bouncing off the little waves in the lake. There was still a light glow on the western horizon where the sun had gone down, and I could see the outline of the mountain peaks, towering over the little lake. I slowly faded off to sleep with the sound of the lake waves, gently lapping on the rocks. I awoke with a start. The fire was out, the lantern was out too. The moon was gone and it was pitch black. Something was definitely wrong. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight out. I was paralyzed. I could hear my heart thumping as I strained to hear something in the bush. But all was quiet. I had a horrible, uneasy feeling. I gathered myself together and started kicking around the fire. A small flame came alive and I quickly threw on some wood. In the firelight, I could see that the boy had awoke and was shocked to see his wide-open eyes staring at me. "What's wrong?" he asked. I lied and said that nothing happened and told him to climb in the tent. He crawled into the tent, but even in the light of fire, I couldn't shake my wariness. Something was out there in the bush, and I could feel it was watching me. I gathered up my light and flashed around our camp. Nothing. Finally, I began to calm down and crawled in the tent with the boy. Then again, like clockwork, I awoke completely tense. This time, I couldn't shake the feeling at all. I finally instructed the boy to wake up and go get in the truck. I packed up all of our camp and drove around to the other side of the lake and slept with him in the truck. At dawn, I got up and looked across the lake where we camped earlier, and another uneasy feeling came over me. I decided it was time to go home. I don't know what was out there, or what was going on over there. But I know my instincts, and I am pretty sure that something was wrong with that place. Whatever it was, I will leave it to your imagination. To this day, it creeps me out, thinking about that night.